Now joining me is Mike Baker. He is a former CIA covert operations officer. He's also president of Diligence LLC. That's a global intelligence and security firm, and I always appreciate his take on things. Michael, the president made a trip to the Pentagon. The nation has widely seen his address last Sunday as kind of ineffective. How do you assess his handling of this whole situation?
Well, I mean, I think for somebody who has such a reputation for being politically astute, it just seems oddly tone deaf to the mood of the American public right now. And as you pointed out, I think that the previous speech that he gave was fairly widely panned, both in its tone and its content, by a bipartisan group up on the Hill, and certainly by a lot of the media. In looking at his speech today, it had the same feel. There was nothing new in terms of strategy. Honestly, it looked like an event that his political operatives had put together because they were worried that they were losing the optic, that they were losing sort of the battle to convince the American public that the president takes us seriously.
All right, Michael, you have to agree that this is an unusual situation, a lot of which he inherited. He speaks of destroying and defeating ISIL. How does that happen? How do we destroy ISIL?
Well, I think you're absolutely correct. This is we can't say it's just this administration. This is probably the most complex issue that any administration has faced in some time now. I mean, all the various players involved and the concerns that exist amongst those various players. So in a sense, when he talks about shrinking the territory, that's really effort number one. We have to be able to do that. The reason why ISIS has had so much success in its recruiting efforts and in its efforts on social media is because of this territory. If they didn't have the territory, they would just be another version of Al-Qaeda, as an example. So we have to be able to take away that territory. The unfortunate reality, though, is that we need more than a couple hundred operators and support personnel on the ground working in training and advising capacities in order to do that. Because when you take away turf, when you shrink that territory, and we have had success, the administration has had some success through the bombing campaign in doing that, but then something needs to come in and take that territory. So that's the first aspect of it. And then, they have not been able to decouple that from the Assad question. And I think that's been the number one problem here, is they look at this and they see this interlinked problem of what do we do with Assad, what do we do with ISIS, and they can't decouple those two. And until they do, I don't think we're going to get the ISIS situation sorted out.
And in what part does Russia play?
Well, exactly. Russia is not about to give up. It's just not going to happen. They're not going to give up their presence in Syria. They're not going to lose their only port for their Black Sea fleet. So we have to accept that fact. The idea that somehow we're going to work with Russia to diminish Russia's influence in Syria by removing Assad seems a little bit unrealistic at this point. And we also have to understand that Russia's agenda is not the same as ours. Then we have Iran, and Iran right now building a Hezbollah-like machine in southern Iraq. Iran facing or realizing the most influence they've had in this region in modern times. You put all of this together, the Turkish problem now that we're facing, it's enormously complex, a very heavy lift, but I think that the general consensus is that the president, for whatever reason, is not committing to a winning strategy as opposed to just a stalemate strategy.
You understand covert operations. Lindsey Graham says there will be a 9/11 style attack coming to America. How would anyone know that?
Yeah, I don't know. I think that's an odd thing to say. But what I do know is that we're currently facing more of a terrorist threat than we have in years, in several years. And we're facing that threat as a result, again, of the Islamic State being able to declare this caliphate that they have. They've now expanded to 9 other countries. And they have a very growing presence in Libya, as an example. And they understand that if they lose their ability to operate independently and as a state in Syria and Iraq, they're moving their headquarters over to Libya. Libya is a disaster. It's a mess. So they're expanding. we're facing this threat. We're facing the problems that they develop through social media. And as we're doing this, as we're facing more of these threats, we've spent the past couple of years, because we're all tired of the war on terror, we've been dismantling certain elements of the counterterrorist program. So those two things don't marry up very well right now.
Terrorism's hard to fight, isn't it? There's a terrorist born, they say, every minute. It doesn't necessarily have a country. It kills civilians. It knows what it's going to do before it's sort of like the wide receiver as opposed to the defensive back. The wide receiver knows where he's going. The defensive back always has to react. It's a tough spot, isn't it?
It's a very tough spot, and we've gotten very good at it over the years. And even well before 9/11, we were trying to understand, how do you get ahead of this? How do you know where we're going? How do we second guess what the next terrorist event may be? And so we've gotten better at sort of the proactive game, but it's a cat and mouse thing, and it's no happy coincidence that we haven't had, although obviously now with San Bernardino, we can't say we haven't had any major incident here since 9/11 on our own turf. But we've disrupted and prevented a lot of those events over the recent past through hard work that nobody ever sees. It goes on 24/7, and we've gotten very good at that. But I don't want to go back to that old saw about how they only have to be right once and we have to be right all the time, but it's essentially true. And you don't want to make too much of their sophistication. ISIS is not a sophisticated group. There's no Lex Luthor out there in the terrorist world, but they're motivated. They've got sufficient resources, and at the point where we're just so tired of this whole war on terrorism, they are energized and they are aggressive, and they feel as if they've got the upper hand right now.
But we probably have stopped a lot of things we don't know about, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. The CIA, my old outfit, the intel community, we're not in the business of trumpeting our successes. And so when you talk about that, people kind of, well, tell me, exactly what did we stop? Well, we don't discuss things like that because of sources and methods and ongoing operations. But people can rest assured that it's no just happy coincidence that we haven't had more such attacks. But the problem is that we know we've got a very motivated enemy right now. And we also know that they have what appears to be a bottomless well of disaffected, easily impressionable, mostly young males out there who are willing to join forces or support or sympathize in some fashion with the Islamic extremist movement. And it's a very heavy lift trying to stop every potential incident.
Michael, you're an outstanding guest. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it very much.
That's Michael Baker, former CIA Covert Operations Officer and president of Diligence, LLC, a global intelligence and security firm.